This is CORDIScovery. Hello and welcome to this episode of CORDIScovery with me, Abigail Acton. We see cultural artefacts, hear music composed centuries ago, and if we're lucky, get to handle pieces that were created by long-forgotten makers. But what about bringing to life the smell of a historic scene or an object no longer made? When we turn to ancient manuscripts to understand the past, we've long focused on what was written on the parchment and the vellum. But what can the material itself tell us about the lives of the animals that gave up their skins and of the people tending them? There's no exploration of the past without the artifacts themselves. So today we will also be considering how to preserve and protect historic buildings from the threat of earthquake damage and vibration. Italy alone has 818 registered monuments and sites which are threatened by more extreme weather events, the seismic activity the country faces, and other environmental factors. So anticipating damage and identifying where structures have become undermined is crucial. From the ephemeral to the massive, how have our three guests given a new voice to the artefacts that enrich our lives? Exploring these new avenues with the help of EU funding are Inge Leemans, a professor of cultural history at the Vrije Universiteit and researcher at the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences. Her research covers topics such as the history of sexuality and emotion and smellscapes of the past. Inge is passionate about making her work accessible to everyone. Hello, Inge.
Hi, Abigail.
Matthew Collins is Fellow of the Danish and Swedish Royal Academies and Chair of the Archaeology section of the British Academy. He holds chairs in Cambridge and Copenhagen universities. Matthew explores the ways in which archaeology can borrow tools from biology to explore ancient artifacts and tissues, from shells to bones to parchments and pots. Hello, Matthew.
Hi.
Michaela Rossi is Scientific Project Officer at the Joint Research Centre, JRC, of the European Commission. Her main research interests include structural safety assessments of historic buildings, seismic and energy retrofitting of existing buildings, structural health monitoring, and digital fabrication. Welcome, Michaela.
Hi, hello, Abigail.
Inge, I'm going to turn to you first. The Ode Europa project set out to pin down that most elusive sensory stimulant, smell. But to make things even more challenging, your project, Inge, was focused on smells of the past. Museums are already trying to provide odour as part of the experience of visiting an exhibit. Where did the idea of taking this further come from?
Well, I had an opportunity to work on a pilot project with one of the smell pioneers, Karel Verbeek, and the Rijksmuseum. And we were doing tours with smells through the Rijksmuseum. And then we thought, oh, how wonderful it would be if you also could do this for digital heritage collections. So say you go to the Louvre website and you would not search for artists, but for how paintings smell, or how you could do that for text. And then the European Union had a call about how to make digital heritage collections more tangible. And then we thought, yeah, smell.
Perfect combination.
Yes.
Yeah. Perfect combination. Okay. So is this descriptions of smells that you're setting out? Because, when we associate odors in museums, of course, they're somehow released into the atmosphere around us. So here it's a description of the kind of smells. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the bulk of the project is actually about opening up historical text and paintings and prints to the nose, to think about smell events in the past. So what we did is we actually invited different computer science groups to design methodologies for sensory mining. And that was fantastic because most of these groups had never worked on smell whatsoever. And also this is quite new. So we really had to think from the start about what is a smell event? How can you teach the computer to capture information about smells in historical text and images?
So can you tell us a little bit about the methodology? How do you actually train a computer to do that? I mean, you're using AI and machine learning, I guess?
Yeah. We use different ways of AI. On the one hand, the text mining component. So we annotate the text and then we trained the computer to automatically detect what we call nose witnesses. So people that are actually talking about smells in the past. And then we have an image recognition group that try to capture smell moments in historical images. Think about the nose when it reaches to an object, for instance, but also people pinching the nose when apparently there's a stench, or seminal smell moments, like when Christ is going into the hell and engages with the smell of hell.
Right.
And a semantic web group brought that all together in a knowledge graph.
So, I mean, there's obvious sort of iconographical imagery of frankincense and myrrh and the gifts of the three kings and stuff. But I think also you were looking at everyday objects like pomanders that were very frequent in the Elizabethan period is the immediate one that comes to my mind.
Yes, yeah. So we trained the computer to capture pomanders from all different kind of paintings or gloves, which were also heavily centered in the early modern period. And then for the text component, we searched for historical recipes of perfumes that were made for these gloves or pomander recipes.
Oh, fascinating. So you're combining the text with the image in order to get a clearer idea of actually what's behind the image. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. And we use that also for historical smell reconstructions and recreation. So that's the next part of the first part of the project is really about the AI and the mining. And then the next part of the project was about smell reconstructions and recreations.
So first you identify references and then you reconstruct what is being referred to. So tell us about that. How do you go about from, a pomander in a painting to recreating the actual object, smell of the object, or another example maybe?
Yeah, so here we worked with perfume industries, so a completely different line of knowledge, and also with heritage science and chemistry expertise. Sometimes really to capture molecules from a historical object. So think if you have a pomander that actually has some residue, or old books, for instance. Then with gas chromatography, you can make reconstructions of actual scents, but also following historical recipes of a pomander, for instance. And sometimes thinking more about historical interpretation. So if you think about the smell of hell, we have so many descriptions of what hell smelled like in the early modern mind, for instance. So we could follow a more creative, you might say, trajectory to think about the components of the smell of hell. So think about scatological, indolic, burning.
Sulfur.
I dragged it around, the smell of hell. It's really quite offensive. So
okay, so you actually created this, didn't you?
Yes,
you have a little file of what hell would smell like.
We do, and we spray it around and then have people smell it in front of paintings where the paintings then have become more to life and become more tangible also to different kinds of visitors. Yes.
Absolutely. Yes, different kinds of visitors too. That's true, because you're stimulating senses that might be the most important senses for certain types of visitors. Yes.
Yes, so you can think about visually challenged people, but also youth groups, for instance. And the really great thing about bringing smell into a heritage context is that it opens up conversations with people, because sort of way smell is democratic. Every one of us has something to say when it comes to smell. So you can bring in your own expertise and share that.
And it's instantaneous. There's no kind of thought process behind it. It just hits us immediately and we have a reaction.
It has a very powerful emotional
especially your smell of hell, apparently. Not to be taken lightly.
Well, the nice thing about the smell of hell is that people really re-engaged with it, became fascinated with it. So it was horrid, but still they wanted to smell it all the time. Which is comparable to sin, I think. Sin, you shouldn't do it, but still people...
But there's an attraction to it.
Yeah.
Very good. This is wonderful. I love this project. Super. Thank you so much for explaining it to us. Does anyone have any questions for Inga? Yes, Michaela, you have a question.
Yes, actually, I have a first question that, Inga already provided the answer, because I was curious about if they managed to reproduce in a lab environment this kind of smell. So the answer is yes. So my second question is, if you have an idea to compare the emotions raised by those smells in the past with the reactions that they cause in a person today. So I think that what you read, the reaction that was raised in the past can be different from a modern person.
That's a very interesting question, Michaela. Inga, what do you think?
Yeah, we think about it in terms of the period nose. So indeed, smelling and the meanings around smell could be quite different in, let's say, 17th and 18th century than now. So, for instance, that smell of hell I was just talking about would have a completely different religious and moral connotation than for us now. Also, because if we smell sulfur, then that takes us to matches, for instance. Or if we think about incense, we probably think about teenagers burning incense in their rooms instead of religious ceremonies in a church or a synagogue, for instance.
And indeed, I guess also we're tuned into the idea of commodities that are expensive as being desirable. So maybe they're a sense which, we would consider to be wonderful because we know them to be rare and expensive. And that presumably changes with the period knows as well.
Absolutely. And also there was a lot of scents were used for aromatherapy. And so there was much more of a medical purpose to the usage of olfaction.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. That's really fascinating. Matthew, I'm going to turn to you. The Beast to Craft project documented the biological and craft records in parchment in order to reveal the entangled histories about animal husbandry and parchment production in Europe from 500 to 1900 AD. Biocodiology, Matthew, a new term for a completely new approach. So this is another very intriguing idea that takes artifacts with which we're familiar and explores them in a completely different way. So I'm going to repeat the first question I actually put to Inga and ask you, where did the idea come from, Matthew?
The idea came from failure, the challenge of trying to identify animal populations based on fragmented remains, because when we eat and consume animals, we tend to smash them up. I had a poor student trying to look at the age structure of ancient Iron Age and Viking cattle populations, was only able to identify 29 animals from about 4,000 fragments. And then to walk through an archive and realize that every single document was made of the skin of an animal, and I was looking at tens of thousands, and just thinking this is an extraordinary documentary record of biology where we have the skins of animals with, in the case of legal documents, the date written on them and the place at least where the legal document was signed. What an incredibly rich biological archive.
Yeah, what a resource. Yeah, and a fascinating new take on the concept. We're all poring over what was written and struggling to deal with, medieval Latin. But in fact, the support itself has so much to tell us as well. So tell me how you went about the analysis. What did your team actually do?
The team began with the horrible realization that despite the vast quantities of material, we weren't allowed to take even the tiniest cut piece of parchment.
Frustrating.
And so in sheer desperation, and often the best ideas are born of desperation, Sarah Fidderman, who is really the coiner of the term biocodic, looked at all the waste products from a conservation studio at York and analyzed everything that they threw away once they'd treated the parchment. And to our great delight, we discovered that when they use a dry PVC eraser, the same things that you used when you were at school to rub away pencil marks, which is commonly used to clean the dirt off the surface of parchment, it was a fabulous trap, first of proteins and then subsequently of DNA. And of course, what that did is it switched the whole project around. No longer were we going to ask conservation studios, archives, and libraries, could we please come and sample? Instead, we went and talked to conservators and said, don't throw the waste away. Here's some boxes with little tubes in them. Put the waste in there. When you're ready, send the box to us and we can analyze them for you.
Oh, fantastic. That's wonderful. It's one of those eureka moments. Very fascinating. And does the rubber itself not interfere? Is it so inert and does it just doesn't get in the way, the traces of the eraser?
What's interesting is that first of all, it seems to stabilize the DNA and the proteins so that we can leave boxes at room temperature with the eraser rubbings for a long time.
Sort of traps them in it, I suppose.
It traps them in it. And secondly, we can then just lift them off chemically from the surface. And certainly, as far as the analysis goes, with the kinds of analysis we do, we don't see any additional signal. If we look for metabolites, low molecular weight organic molecules, we would certainly see components in the eraser, but those are not the analyses we do. And what it's meant is that, instead of us having to go to libraries, we've been able to analyze over 7,000 parchment samples sent to our labs by these conservators. And they've, of course, been very engaged in the project.
Well, it's so intriguing.
So it actually reminds me of what Inga was saying, that, it's the democratization of this work, which I think is actually really exciting in this field. Nobody is an expert, as you learn very quickly. And by working together, you learn so much more. That's
wonderful. Excellent. So now tell me, what did you actually do? So you have these samples that come into you from all over the place, which of course is massively more efficient, and it's spiking a lot of people's curiosity and so on. So what sort of analysis did you actually do?
Well, we started off with a very simple question, which was we used proteomics to ask what animal skin was used to make this parchment. And so one of the very first things was, parchment is often called vellum for very fine parchment, coming from the word veal, so for calf skin. And the idea was that the very finest parchments were always made of calf skin. We were able to show quite early that's not true. They're actually made of the local livestock near where the site of production was. So it's all actually about the craft skill, and we were very lucky in our project. One of the key project members was somebody who makes parchment, and so he could really explain to all of us the materiality and the look and feel of this material. Once we've done that, we started asking more questions, and we keep asking more questions, and they go on and on. So the way the parchment was made, what kind of salts are associated with it, what are the sex of the animal that's used to make parchment, you realize that there's a very rich biological material. And we can even go so far as to ask, what was the rainfall like in the spring of the year in which the animal was killed? It really is extraordinary.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, yes, a step further than counting rings on trees. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay. And can you tell us some of the things that you found?
It goes on and on. That's very hard to answer, because it's literally every time you look at a new object, you get a different story.
Choose your favorite story. Choose your favorite story.
My favorite story is we looked at a book very early on where we could see there were two scribes who were writing this text. And they set up to write this text with a very ordered structure of calf and sheep together. And then a very strange thing happens in the middle, and calf, which we think to be a better quality text, is suddenly all being used up. And then the very last section of the book, and this is a 12th century book from Canterbury, a glossed Luke, was made of sheepskin. But in the middle, there was a piece of goat skin. And we realized that this was probably a scribal joke. The original scribe seems to have realized he couldn't complete the text and had used up all of the calf skin. And as he was writing the story of the prodigal son, which, if you recall, the son that stays back home and doesn't go off and doesn't get given the fatted calf, complains he's not even given a goat to have a feast with his friends. And just after he's written that text, and just before he leaves the book to the second scribe, who has to use a poor quality sheepskin, he inserts right in the middle two skins, the front half of a flea-bitten goat. And as we almost never see goat skin in English documents, I suspect that was his final comment. I've used up the best calf. Here's a bit of a goat, and now the second scribe, you've just got some miserable sheepskin
to go on with. Yeah, I mean, the coincidence is really a bit too great, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Yeah. That's a wonderful story, Matthew.
But there's so many stories like that, and that's the strange that every document tells a story.
God, it's fantastic. Excellent. So what do you think is the next step for this area of study?
Well, I mean, that's interesting. It seems to be growing and growing. The fact that we can now see the pathogens on the surface of the skin may mean we can document pathogens of coevolution.
Now, when you say the pathogens and the pathogens of coevolution, be more precise, what are you talking about here? What sort of pathogens, and what do you mean by coevolution?
So now we're beginning to look at the DNA on the surface, and we are seeing the presence of pathogens of animals which are probably coming from the slaughterhouse where the parchments are being made. And so one question is the relationship between those pathogens and their evolution. And then secondly, I think the genetics of the animals and how they are changing in space and time. Because what's been intriguing is to analyze text and copying errors in text. They are using very similar bioinformatic tools to the ones that they're using for genetics. And of course, that means that every single skin, has a text written on the surface with a story of the copying history of those texts. And in the genetics, the animals and the effect of the copying history, the ancestry of the animals themselves.
Working in parallel.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful explanation. Does anyone have any questions for Matthew? Yeah, Inga.
Yeah, very obvious one, or at least for me, of course. Do you use nose knowledge?
We should be, Inga. Oh, we should be, but we don't, because one of the things that we can't identify well are sheep and goats. And you know from your nose that they smell very different. I mean, caproic acid, the goat smell, is very clear. And I think it's one of the things that we should be using more. So, because again, it's another sensory component. And I also asked the question, when you make fresh goat skin and sheepskin, they're actually quite hard to tell apart visually. But I bet at the time the scribes could smell the difference.
Absolutely.
We need to use gas spectrometry again. Wonderful. Okay, thanks. I'm going to move on to Michaela. We've gone from the totally insubstantial idea of smell, intangible and abstract ideas of image and so on, and the fine tuning of genetics. And now, Michaela, we're going to go to something really big. We're going to go to huge, strong, big buildings because Stretch devised a new sensing system that can be placed non-invasively in sensitive monuments and buildings to determine their structural integrity, to show the impact of an earthquake or the vibration of traffic, for example. Michaela, what inspired you to become interested in how monuments withstand earthquakes?
Yeah, I mean, as a building engineer and architect, I've always been fascinated by the preservation of historic structures. But yeah, what really left a mark on me and probably shaped my career in the future was this experience that I had back in 2009. At that time, I had just graduated, and my thesis supervisor invited me to take part in a survey campaign in the historical centers hit by the L'Aquila earthquake in the central of Italy, to assess the state of damage and gather documentation. So I jumped at the opportunity, and it turned out to be a very valuable experience. But of course, seeing the devastation firsthand, well, it was something else, because we are talking about ordinary historic building, monumental buildings such as churches and palaces that had stood for ages and just crumbled to pieces. So that moment I knew that I wanted to do something, anything, to help prevent such destruction in the future with my job.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, that would be a powerful motivator. So what did Stretch actually develop? You say you wanted to do something to try and prevent this from happening again in the future, as far as possibly can be prevented. What is Stretch doing? What did it develop?
Yeah, the Stretch project explores a novel technological solution to provide simultaneous retrofitting combined with structural health monitoring, which is particularly tailored for cultural heritage building. So at the base of this technology, there's the use of high-strength, lightweight textile that can be made of carbon, glass, basalt, or even natural fibers such as hemp, flax, and sisal, which are embedded in a mortar matrix. And the result of this combination, mortar plus textile, is the composite material that can be applied to the masonry building's external walls to provide an additional strength and utility to the structure. But in Stretch, we thought, but why don't you use this technology and embed in the mortar not just a textile, but some sensor that can detect any anomalies in the structure, not even the structure, but also in changes of other parameters like temperature, humidity. And so, yeah, we realized like a kind of smart multifunctional material that can retrofit the building at the same time monitor the state of the building.
Lovely, excellent, fantastic. So is it like patches of material? How big are the pieces of material, and whereabouts do you place them in the building? Do you place them near the foundation or higher up? I imagine perhaps you place them higher up because that's where there would be more of a response to vibrations. Where does the material go, and how big is it?
Yeah, the material goes to cover the entire surface of the masonry wall, but we can even decide to not just apply it on the entire surface, but select some particular portion of the building that are more vulnerable. And these vulnerabilities can be detected by the monitoring system. We can control the effectiveness of the applied retrofitting system with this integrated monitoring system. So yeah, it's like realizing a kind of nervous system that cover the building, allowing to detect and report any potential issues in real time.
Now, that reporting is fascinating because that leads me to my next question, of course, is that you're collecting data with these sensors, but then what happens to the data? Where does it go and who sees it?
Yeah, we decided to use this technology of optical fiber sensor because these sensors are able to detect along their length all these changes. But at the same time, they are also the means through this data are communicated to what? To a kind of box, like a station called interrogator, where all the data are collected, and that there they can be locally, let's say, analyzed, or they can even send to a remote control system or a central station via wired communication, but also wireless communication. So the best way to use this kind of system is to use the Internet of Things system, so that we can send this data remotely. We can then analyze the data, and so we can create a way to manage our building.
So it's basically like the invisible becoming visible. I liked your nervous system idea. So the building is reporting back to you the areas in which it is vulnerable and where you maybe need to think about reinforcing structurally and so on. I think that's fascinating. Absolutely brilliant. Super. Thank you very much. And if you project yourself into the future, imagine 10 years or so, Michaela, where do you hope this technology that you've developed will be being used? Is it already being placed in situ in some places?
Yeah, this technology is already used in some places, but not with a real integration with a monitoring system. And a further idea of the project is also to include a way to increase the energy performance of the building. So this is because, of course, historical buildings are also very energy inefficient. And so if we really want to protect them and prevent for other damage in the future, we want to leave this building. So we want to live inside the building and also increase their internal comfort. I would also like to see a development of a really integrated structural plus energy retrofitting system. For instance, using mortar that are not only helpful to increase the mechanical strength properties, but also the thermal insulating properties of the material.
All the while with the sensors telling you where there are areas that need to be corrected. Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you very much, Michaela. Does anyone have any questions for Michaela? Yes, Matthew.
Yes, I do, Michaela. Given that you're now monitoring these buildings with such detail, how long will it be before the data you collect enables you to be able to predict similar conditions in buildings which lack your monitoring system?
Yeah, actually, this is a very good question, because indeed, the best way to using this data is to connect this data with some BIM models, which are like 3D digital models that are used to design, construct, and also manage buildings. And also another optimal idea is to use this data with artificial intelligence. So to create some model, some structural numerical model that can analyze what is happening in real time with some model that are predicting the behavior of this building, so you can fine tune what is really happening with your numerical model prediction. So the idea is exactly to use this data in this direction.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's super. Okay. Well, 3 wonderful projects that are either bringing heritage to life in a completely new way, or making sure that we still have ancient heritage going into the 21st century, the end of the 21st century and onwards. So thank you very much for all your hard work there and for the time you spent this morning sharing these ideas with me. Super. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. If you've enjoyed this episode, follow us on Spotify or Apple or wherever else you get your podcasts, and check out the CORDIScovery homepage on the CORDIS website. Subscribe to make sure the hottest research in EU-funded science isn't passing you by. And if your friends ask if you've heard of any good science podcasts recently, why not spread the word? We've talked about the effect magic has on crows and the dynamics between climate change and violence. In our last 38 episodes, there will be something there to tweak your curiosity. Perhaps you want to know what other EU-funded projects are doing to analyse and preserve our cultural heritage. The CORDIS.eu website will give you an insight into the results of projects funded by Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe that are working in this area. Check out the projects brought together in a pack called Preserving Culture and Cultural Heritage. The website has articles and interviews that explore the results of research being conducted in a very broad range of domains and subjects, from isotopes to epitopes. There's something there for you. Maybe you're involved in a project or would like to apply for funding. Take a look at what others are doing in your domain. So come and check out the research that's revealing what makes our world tick. We're always happy to hear from you. Drop us a line, editorial@cordis.europa.eu. Until next time.